I always romanticized growing up, like the age of, the Abaddon power age of photography, where it's like, look, like you're a name, not a person, not an influencer, not an entity. And your name is linked to your work. It's not linked to like you. You are your work, but your work speaks for you. Now you speak for your work.
That was a clip from today's guest. So everybody, welcome back to the show. I am a person who's into kind of like real like niche things. Like I love vinyl records, and that might not be niche anymore, but like I love vinyl records, grew up with those kinds of things. When I was a kid, I like collected comic books. Like I like things that like where not everyone, it's maybe not for everyone, but if you get it, you get it. And whenever I find someone who's like built up a business that's based on something that's like really unique, and you can tell it comes from a place of just like, they really appreciate this thing, I'm always interested in it. And today's person is just that. It's someone who's done something that's super cool, like really, really, really cool. And it's also something that I just like, if you hear about it, you'd be like, how the heck does that work? So that's what we're going to find out today. So before we get to it, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. My name is Aram and Ian, and this is One Step Beyond. Welcome to the show.
Well, right on. Thank you so much for having me, and so much for the kind words of introduction. It means a lot.
You bet. So for the uninitiated, for those who don't know, who are you and what do you do?
So most simply put, I am Ian Azariah, and I am a Tin Type photographer, as well as I own, operate, and refurbish analog photo booths.
Dude, this is like when your name first came up and you provided that video for us to look at, I was like instantly like, I got to talk to this guy. Just like that. How does one, first of all, like what is it, which is what I want to get into, but then how does one get into that and then actually turn it into a thing? So first, could you explain, and I know it's two things, but can you first explain the type of photography you do and like what does it actually like mean to a layperson?
So the type of photography I practice is called Tintype, and it's the second form of photography ever invented. What it is essentially taking either sheets of metal or sheets of glass and then sensitizing them with real silver, loading them into an accordion style camera that most people associate with Ansel Adams, photographing the image directly onto the sheet of metal or glass, and then developing it right instantaneously in front of the person who I just photographed.
When did this first start being a thing? Like was this invented and kind of entered into popular culture?
So first form of photography, and I might get some of this wrong, whatever, but I'm just going to give you what I think is correct. It's where they took paper, coated it with salt, and then they used camera obscurers, which they'd already developed, which is like either small pinholes or lenses attached to rooms that were flip an image and projected onto a wall, right? So they developed a camera obscurer first, and they're like, look, like this is so crazy. We can like create a two-dimensional image of what's going on outside. Everyone became motivated to figure out like, well, how do we capture these images, right? And so that creates kind of a spiral of people using the power of observation to figure out things that are light sensitive, or at least they were just trying to figure out how we can capture this light that they're trying to see and understand. So the first form of photography, I believe people took paper and they coated it with salt. And then based on different levels of exposure to light, this particular salt would either darken or remain bright, right? So they do that, place it in front of the camera obscura, and they're able to capture images over long durations of exposure time. And so this basically set into action people trying to study other things that became light sensitive and trying to understand how they could use those to create a photographic medium, which at the time, no one even knew what to call these things. This was just like witchcraft, right? So a certain chemical that's very critical in this process is something called silver nitrate. Silver nitrate is just a brick of silver melted in sulfuric acid until it turns into a powder form, and I mix that with distilled water until it hits what we call the correct specific gravity. Long story short, liquid silver. If you take this liquid silver and you drop it on your skin, initially nothing will happen. It'll be as though you dropped water on your skin. You'll wipe it off. But then if you sat there and just watched it the whole time or created a time lapse of it, over a duration of time, it will slowly darken and turn your skin black and stain it black for like 2 weeks, right? And people realized that this was happening. They're like, oh, well, if we spill some of this silver nitrate on anything organic, initially it seems fine, but then it darkens out quite a bit. So people came to the realization that silver was a light sensitive metallic. So then became the journey to figure out how they could create images out of this silver. And so initially what they did is they started taking egg whites and beating them up and trying to coat like plates with egg whites and then pour the silver onto it to hopefully create a substrate that could adhere to metals. Mm-hmm. Then someone came to find that through the chemical table that metal was what we call a halide. And if they used a bromide within their substrate, they could probably encourage the halide to bond to the bromide more readily. And that is when I believe somebody named Frederick Archer Scott in France basically concocted what we call collodion, which is basically the substrate which we either pour on top of our glass or metal to create a very thin, tacky, and gelatinous layer before we submerge the plate into a bath of liquid nitrate so that we can allow liquid nitrate to adhere to the plate before going into a dark room, loading it into a camera and photographing with it.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Pretty crazy stuff.
So like sometimes Monica and I talk about like who made bread? Like who figured out bread? Like how did that happen? You know, all of these things that like to us are just
what's more impressive, bread or toast?
Tell me more. Tell me more.
I don't know, because like we don't consider toast bread. It's a transformative process, right? I'm sure that bread's more impressive, but I always just thought like, who's a fucking genius who just sliced this shit up and
toasted it up?
Yeah.
Well, dude, it's so like, you know, all this stuff that we just take for granted. It's
like it again.
Like all this stuff we take for granted. It's like like bread. Like who came up with that?
Yeah.
And also like such ancient peoples came up with this. It's totally crazy. So that extrapolated out is like all the crazy stuff that we have built. But what you just talked about and what I like that you kept hitting on is like, so people figured out, oh, this could do this could do that.
It's steps.
Well, yeah.
It's steps. Most people are like, immaculate conception, right?
Right.
But that's not the case in most things. You know, it's a series of small observations linked into a larger picture. Most like everything.
Well, but also it's like, what, like the will to do it without like necessarily like there isn't like a return on investment or whatever. It's just like, oh, I just want to figure this out. Like this could be a cool thing. I love when people just kind of innovate things because they're like, oh, let's figure this thing out. Let's do this thing. And nobody can know what it would go on to become, like, you know, commercial photography, It's just people figuring stuff out for the sake of figuring it out to do something cool with it. So to the best of your knowledge, and I'm not asking you for a complete history here, but so this format takes shape. How long was it popularized and was kind of like a common or would be like the main form of photography before it was replaced by other innovations?
The purists are going to kill me for my lack of like dead on nailing out knowledge here. But all right. So this bad boy is invented, and what I'm to understand is like 1851 to 18, like, let's call it like 65 or something like that, right? Not a huge window, right? And half the reason for this is by technical name, this process is called wet plate collodion. That's what the technical name for it is. Tintype's just like a colloquialism that everyone kind of knows, right? And the reason why they call it wet plate collodion is because you're absolutely required to have a darkroom like literally next to you and running water next to you to make these photographs. I can't like prep these plates and like carry them around all day and then be like, you want a tintype? Do it. And then like carry it back to my studio and develop it later. I need to make this thing start to finish with a perfect time cadence, with perfect technique on the spot, without skipping a beat, back to back to back from start to finish within a 10-minute window. Otherwise, it will not work. So in order to accomplish tintype, you usually used to have to cruise around with like a literal covered wagon that would act as your darkroom, right? And so that became odious to people, and it just made it an incredibly specialized craft. And that's when it was like replaced with what we today know as like the ferrotype or daguerreotype, which is what we call a dry plate process, which is where like I can coat like a liquid emulsion onto a plate in a darkroom, allow it to sit and dry, load them into a rack, and then go out in the field and shoot them and then come back later and process them. And like, that is very cool. But it somewhat lacks like the infinite level of information that we receive from a tintype just due to its process.
Well, tell us about that, this infinite amount of information. Like how is, to a lay person. So if I say to someone about like vinyl records and like why that's more important than a CD, and I'm just talking to like I don't know, someone who just only listens to Spotify, they're not going to get it.
So the vinyl record analogy, we'll probably talk a lot more about that later when we get into sort of my other side of things, because it's a more applicable analogy there. But that is one of the greater ways which you can lay it down to the quote layperson, because everyone hears and understands music. To some people, it all sounds similar, but to people who, know and love this medium, there is an intangible X factor that can be received from it. And this is something that we'll very much, I'm sure, get into later as well. This is happening across the world, where we've gone so far into the digital perfection era that we are realizing that the true benchmark of visceral experience has already been passed. And, so what it is in terms of tintype and why it is irreplicatable in the digital world is just its process in and of itself. It was one of the first photographic mediums ever made. And it's what we call a contact photograph, where we photograph the final size of the photograph in camera. So unlike, say, a 35 millimeter film camera, which some people might be familiar with, where we create a 35 millimeter slab of film and then stick it into a larger and multiply it by like what would be, 8 to 12 times its size to create an 8x10, we lose quality in that, right? In addition, the ISO of modern films to accommodate fast photography is usually around, say, minimum of 100 and up. Now with tintype, since what we're doing is a contact print, we have zero loss of information because we are looking at an original replication of the image through the lens. Since we didn't have the technology to speed up light sensitivity when this was invented, ISO of tintype registers starting at 0.5 ISO. And then as the chemicals degrade, the ISO or sensitivity of those chemicals becomes even slower. Now, what ISO means, in terms of explaining that to a regular person, it means how sensitive the film is to light. But in addition, the higher your ISO, the larger what we call your grain structure is in the photograph. And grain structure is what breaks up the amount of detail within the photograph. So in terms of grain structure on a tintype, it is virtually infinite. One could interpret it as pixels, where if we photograph with like a NASA camera that's got 1,000 megapixels, we can zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom, and it never pixelates. It holds the degree of information. Tintype is exactly that. Tintype, when you zoom in on these scans and you start going in and 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 going in, it never, ever breaks down in quality. When you're able to scan it on a high-end scanner and actually swim into the detail of tintypes, it is like nothing you have ever seen. And I personally have, worked with like phase 1 cameras, which are giant medium format commercial level cameras that shoot up to 240 megapixel images. This is for doing, like giant billboard posters for whatever, movies, etc. Those have a ton of detail, but it is not absolute lossless, infinite detail. There's always battles in digital photography of chromatic aberration and how the sensor processes color. And we end up having a lot more optical limitations in how glass is designed in order for digital sensors to be able to read it properly. In terms of capturing light using silver, seamless. And so when you light a tintype properly, expose it properly, and develop it properly, the amount of information in there is unparalleled to any methodology of image creation that we'll ever find in this modern world.
So was it left behind just because it was kind of like unwieldy and like, kind of a pain?
Same reason records were left behind. Do you want to carry 300 pounds of gear to the wedding to DJ this bad boy? Do you want to show up with your iPod that can hold 3,000 albums in your pocket? So like, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the advancement of capitalism and the advancement of, speed of delivery for the sacrifice of quality. And this is like a linear tangent that the world's been on for quite some time. And we always sacrifice quality and then technologically advance that technology. So we come to a point where we're very happy. Like, every single one of us has a professional camera now. It's called your iPhone. They're unbelievable. But, it is in the keyword visceral experience that we truly find that some mediums are better than others. And we may have just overlooked them momentarily just due to human nature of constantly, like you said, figuring it out just for the sake of figuring it out. You know, it's just what we do.
So how did you come to this?
Shooting tintype?
Yeah.
So I guess a little bit of sidebar tangent going on here. Like, in addition to doing all this original, photography stuff, I ended up sort of like, frankly and truthfully, just lying my way into the world of film. And I ended up, basically working in tandem with a 3-dimensional motion capture crew known as Weta Digital to build 3-dimensional motion captures for big Hollywood films type vibe, like all the Planet of the Apes and the Pirates of the Caribbean, stuff like that, right? And it's incredibly numerical in the sense that, if you make an error on set and triangulating and creating the grid that we need to properly capture the information, it's probably going to cost more than most people make in a year to fix it. And that's NBD to the Hollywood industry. But, like anybody, of the mentality of doing something and doing it to the absolute highest of ability, you get into it and you get so dialed, And for me, I like dichotomies because I believe that always being an amateur at something continues to, just keep you on your toes and keep you fresh, I guess, like without getting too deep into it. So I had been contracted to go and do a film in Texas for Weta, and I had been doing pretty nonstop 3-dimensional motion capture volume work at that point for like 3 or so years. And, good living. It's, very, very, you're very coddled in the world of like Hollywood, whatever. And obviously when these opportunities come around, you don't just pass on them, buy the ticket, take the ride. So I was contracted in to go and get like my O2 visa down in America. And I was going to be doing this film for them, some anime feature called Battle Angel Alita. It's obviously come out since. And I decided that as a way to stay, connected to my original roots of passion, which was always kind of photography. I used to shoot for like all the local magazines, Vancouver Magazine, Monte Cristo and all that. I used to do a lot of editorial portraiture work, shooting predominantly on a Hasselblad 501C, developing all my own film, scanning it myself, retouching, loved it. So I decided I wanted to do something tactile again. I used to run the darkroom back in university as well. Love all that stuff. So I singled out Tintype as what I'd like to try and pursue next, mostly because it's widely regarded as absolutely the most difficult pursuit. Like there's none above it in terms of technical execution. It's the hardest. And this is right around the time when like the world had really gone Instagram, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, oh, let me see your portfolio. It's like, how many followers you got, my dog? Like, I don't know, like that's cool and everything. But like, I always romanticized growing up, like the age of, the Avedon power age of photography, where it's like, look, like you're a name, not a person, not an influencer, not an entity. And your name is linked to your work. It's not linked to like you. You are your work, but your work speaks for you. Now you speak for your work and you're just like, spinning a wheel. Why not too much? But anyways, so at that time, the world had gone that way. And, I was like, you guys are zigging, I'm zagging. Let's go. Like everyone can operate Lightroom. Got it. Like I studied photography back when it was like a masterful craft. We were pushing and pulling film, just trying to figure out what our look was going to be, or at least that's what I loved. And so, when the universal application of, what used to be considered a specialized skill set, we're seeing it right now with coding and chat GPT. Obviously we end up, either you double down and show people what you're really fucking made of and that you can't be replicated by a machine, or the machines win.
Yeah.
So I was like, let's go. Let's try this next challenge. And so I grabbed myself, all the necessary kind of things to teach myself Tintype. And I started teaching myself Tintype.
How long did it take?
Still learning.
Okay.
I mean, that's the thing is like Tintype, anybody who's actually like properly finessed and crafted at it will tell you, and it is dead true, that you need like a minimum of 5 years in Tintype before you get to a point where you just straight chef it up. And you're tuned into the chemicals. And it's like one of those things where, it's like driving race cars, I'm sure, where, you can talk about it all you want. You can watch it on the television all you want. You can think about it all you want, but like there's nothing quite like doing it in terms of gaining experience, right?
All right. I got to bounce back to something. So tell me about lying your way into the film industry.
Oh, easy. All right. Basically, we're going back to Chicago on this one, right? So I'm living and working in Chicago. I'm doing that whole thing.
This post-university
or over summer breaks, whatever. Right? And so I'm doing that whole thing. And like, essentially like this guy who I know there, me and him basically like, I couldn't make a living just off being a freelance photo assistant, but like I'm always like been the entrepreneur, right? Trying to figure out ways to like, crack and hack the system.
Yeah.
And one of the ways at the time that you could do this was through iPhones, right? You might recall when an iPhone was released, iPhone fucking 1, right? Where could you get them?
No idea.
Could you get one here in Canada?
No, you couldn't.
No, you couldn't. But if you were a baller, it was the biggest flex to be like, look at this. It's connected to TELUS Fido Rogers. And this is an iPhone 1. You know what I mean? And you're just like, I have the Steve Jobs flex, right? So how does that guy get that phone? Someone has to be able to purchase that phone from the localized area that they're in, use their geographical advantage to procure an item that's desirable worldwide. But beyond that, they must also figure out how to crack them. Because jailbreaking an iPhone is what we referred to it back in the day as, right? Where if your iPhone was quote unquote jailbroken, it means that it was no longer tethered to AT&T's networks. And any SIM card inserted into the jailbroken iPhone could then run on the operating system of delivery, right? That's a market, right? So we did that. So we basically, like, I was just buying iPhones and I was unlocking them and stuff. And
now, did someone teach you how to do it, or did you figure out how to do it?
I taught myself on YouTube, as well as one of my friends was kind of like slightly into it. But like as the iOSs would update, you would order the new phones from Apple.
Right.
I don't even know if I should put this in. This could be illegal. Like
this is what I mean.
Anyways, so yeah, as the iOSs would update and stuff, in essence, they would become more difficult to break. So you'd have to relearn how to jailbreak every new iOS update because they ship it with the new iOSs. And like eventually, obviously, this market cratered on itself when the AT&T monopoly goes down. And then all of a sudden, we have the worldwide iPhone rush. But like, it's usually like 2 years, let's say, of, creating a market and a way for you to generate income, right? So, we're doing that and whatever. Anyways, we became good friends. And he at the time was a PA in film. And essentially did a lot of that kind of work. And I was doing my thing. And so we're both like freelance, kind of like, right-hand man to the lens man, right? So kind of we're doing that. And then I ended up like going backpacking Asia, Australia, doing all that thing, right? And then I come back to Vancouver and I once again like start buckling in more of a sense where I'm like, I'm going to be a shooter. I want to start as I intend to go on. You don't want to be like, oh, Ian, I know that kid from set. He's like, gets my coffee, right? Like that's something you have to be conscious of when you switch markets. And I was like, win or lose, like we're going to be known as the guy who shoots frames, not the guy who, sets up lights and whatever, which is, it's a path that is very important to take at times. And so I'm doing that. And then I remember I get a phone call from Robert. And he's like, dude, you need to listen to me very carefully. I don't have a lot of time to talk, but this is all really important. And I'm like, got it. And like, he's like, okay, so I'm working on Superman, Man of Steel. And it's in Chicago. That's where Superman's from, right? And so he's like, and I just walked past like the visual effects guys and I overheard them saying that they have like no idea who to hire to like run their camera systems in Vancouver. So I like jumped in there and I was like, you don't ever want to hire? I got a guy you can hire. You should hit up my guy, Ian. Like this guy's the best at it. He absolutely kills it. He's done this work before. None of that is true. Right. And like, he knows that, but like, I would have said the same thing for Robert. Like, oh yeah, he absolutely dunks it. Because like one thing I know about him and one thing he knew about me is that like, you can write a check because we're going to cash it, And so he basically like talked me up, pumped my tires. He's like, they're going to call you up. They're going to use like a code name for this film or whatever. And, just tell them you're really good at it. I've seen what these guys do on set and like, I feel as though like with your background and knowledge, it shouldn't be an issue for you to catch on really quick. So I just did that. And like, they called me up and I was like, oh yeah, man. And like at the time, like what I was getting hired into was such a new world in film, just due to like the constant advancements of visual effects in this department. And it was like ungoogleable, like it was like, what even is this? But like, I was just like, yeah, right on, dog. Like, let's go. Like, yeah, what am I going to do? Just be like, no, it's cool, man. Thanks for thinking of me.
But they didn't ask like, what have you worked on before or anything like that?
That's the thing. It was so new that there's no way you could even have been like, yeah, like I've done this feature before that like required this particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you take it on and then what?
I show up on the planet Krypton, right? Which is in Burnaby in a warehouse. And I have no idea what's going on, right? Like I remember like at one point in time, they're all like, don't look at the actor's eye lines. And I'm like, dude, like what is an eye line? Anyways, yeah, I basically show up on planet Krypton and I'm like, I watch and learn, right? So like, obviously you're playing like a bit of a finesse game where you're trying to be, got it. But like, meanwhile, like I'm like so in over my head in like a lot of these like worlds. But well, yeah, I showed up and I just like figured it out on the spot, like, got nice with it real quick. And like, if you fast forward, a couple years down the road, I ended up becoming like head of that department. So I knew what's going on and still do. Like, no, I don't really accept those jobs anymore, but I still get emails about them.
Yeah. I have two questions about that. The first is, after you became like not just proficient, but then ended up like heading the department.
Yeah.
Did you ever catch someone else trying to kind of fake the funk and get their way in there?
Well, sort of like, that's like once you like roll into your crew and you've got your squad that like you guys are rolling from like feature to feature and you're banging these things out. Like, yeah, 100%, man. Like there was this guy who I knew and I liked his jive, right? And like, I thought he was cool. And I knew at the time that we were going to be going down a member in our team. And like the person who was leading the team at the time, we were like thick as thieves. We got along really well. And so he asked me if I knew anybody who would be like kind of dialed for this position. And my friend, I knew he would probably be pretty good at it. And like he really wanted to like, have a win. He was having a really tough year at the time. And I knew he always was interested in jumping into film. Now, granted, we're working on a Steven Spielberg film at this point. So it's not like, oh, you're going to start on like this Hallmark indie. Like it's going to be, pretty cool. So I remember I hit him up because I had to do like a photo shoot on like the Sunday, just like for some gallery as part of it. Was like living two lives at that point. And I hit him up and I asked him to go and get me a smoke machine from Hollywood North. And I made sure to like leave out some details, like where that is and like all that other stuff, right? Just to see if this guy's like really on top of stuff, being like, got it, no problem. I got you. I'll fill in the dots. Cause like, that's what you want, is you want somebody who's just like, look, go do this. And they're like, all right. And he did it. And he had worked in some films before, but he never like worked at this magnitude or in this department whatsoever. Mm-hmm. We just hired him in right away, whatever, so Nepo hire, I guess. But like at the same time, absolutely no idea what he's doing. And like in that world, in my opinion, you get a lot further in that world by being proficient at your job, but affable to hang out with for literally endless hours amounts of day per week, right?
Yeah.
Than you do being like the best in the world at your job, know-it-all, who's absolutely flawless, but you're absolutely insufferable to be around because like, who wants to hang out with a guy in literal pouring rain for 18 hours a day in the trenches, carrying hundreds of pounds of gear up and down muddy slats when this person's just not going to do it with a smile and a laugh, like, you're picking your soldiers. So, sure, knowing what you're doing is important, but, being someone who can learn what to do and being someone who's like really great to spend time with and an asset to a team is nearly more important in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree. But B, what I'm real interested in here is like, because I'm going to ask you a second question about cracking the system and something you said there. But like, I'm just going to ask you like a fictitious thing. You can either play or not play on it. If you were in a position of where like, hey, I actually need someone who knows what they're doing here, and someone was coming in and you knew they were faking it, like they didn't actually know, like they were good, like they could probably figure it out, but they were overstating their qualifications of what they've done, would you give them like I'll give this guy a shot because I like the guts that he has to take to do it? Or would you be like, no, I really need to know if you can do this?
Depending on what position I'm in, like obviously there's things where you need someone to thread the needle. And that's just, and a day I need to have like zero questions about what the end result is going to be. I need to like delegate this, and I just need to be positive that this is going to turn out the way it needs to turn out. And other things, yeah, I mean, like whatever. If you're finger gunning from the hip, but I like your moxie, like, I'll probably be like, yeah, dog, like, let's go. Like, let's see what you got. Like, I don't know. Cause like a lot of the times in like my life, I feel as though like I was just like the persistent underdog,
Yeah.
And so like I see that in others, and like, obviously you want to like, if you end up in that position, you want to be able to like give forward and give somebody else who is really deserving of that opportunity despite qualification, is I guess what I'd say. If somebody is deserving the opportunity despite qualification, it's always worth it to give them a shot. And in my opinion, usually it's like within a 3-week window, you're going to understand whether this is something that's blossoming or this is something where like you may have made a judgment call in which this wasn't exactly the best route to take, and then analyze whether it's something where you want to like either correct the route or figure out what happens next.
The reason I'm asking all this and I'm interested in it is 2 reasons. One, we had another podcast guest, this friend of ours, Martin. Shout out to Martin, you're awesome. Who had a hilarious story about he basically talked his way into this like government job. And like, it's a great story.
Well, every interview's talking your way into a job, I guess, right?
Well, his was more like, I was woefully unqualified for this job, but got into it. And a great story. And it kind of set him up for all this other stuff. And so I just like, I like stories like that because they're just like fun, interesting stories. But the other side of it is, so I used to be a therapist when I was younger. And when I first became a therapist, it was kind of the Wild West in Canada, where like almost like a well-intentioned person who had a good life story and was good with people could be a therapist. You had to have some qualifications, but they weren't like what they became. And over my time working in that field, it became more and more like you had to have like a master's degree and all these kinds of trainings. You had to have an RCC, And the person I learned the most from was this woman named Diane, who I worked with at this out in New West in this addiction mental health unit, who had no formal, very, very little like formal education, was kind of grandfathered in, and was like this insane, like unbelievable therapist, like super, super good. I learned a ton from her. And then I worked with people who had master's degrees, who was just like, have you ever talked to a human being before? How did you get this job? You are not good at what you do. And of course, there's like, everyone's different, but there's all sorts of jobs. Like a job like a therapist is like a highly sensitive job. So I think there's got to be, I think like the idea of having credentials isn't wrong and having education is wrong, but it also can preclude you for some people who are just like goddamn good at it, either because they have natural talent or they got life experiences or they've got moxie and they can learn. And that idea about whether or not education or experience or moxie or any of these things, like what's the magic formula? I don't think there's any magic formula, but I do think it's about being able to read people and give them a shot, but also being willing to fail quick if they're not doing the job.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, I don't even know if like, if they have the merit to be, considered for that position, is kind of what I look at. Because do you have the merit to, get to this point? But yeah, I mean, I think that's an apt take on it.
All right. You also said you've always liked cracking the system. Where'd that come from?
It's just like something that's just always kind of been like a part of my personality, where like, I want to go and figure out like how I can get it, where, when you were a kid, where'd you grow up?
Me, myself?
Yeah.
Calgary.
Yeah. Right. Snow's there.
Yeah.
What'd you do in the winters?
I skateboarded in my basement.
What'd you do for money?
At what age?
8.
What did I do for money? I think I had an allowance, but my allowance was based on doing chores around the house, mowing the lawn, stuff like that.
Were you in a neighborhood or a farm?
I was at not just a neighborhood, an ultra safe neighborhood.
Okay. So this is exactly how you can identify who's an entrepreneur. First step, look for the kid who's shoveling driveways. If you were shoveling driveways when you're a kid, 9 times out of 10, you're going to probably at least try to own a business by now. You know what I mean? Like, and that was me, right? If it snowed, I was like, there's money in these streets. We got to get shoveling, right? So you establish like a relationship with like the person next door to you or like the person up the crescent, right? Where all of a sudden they're like, yeah, like if this kid's going to wake up and have my driveway shoveled by like 8:30 a.m. when I need to drive to work, or like at least like have it shoveled so when I get home, like we're good. It's pennies on the dollar to these guys, right? Like they're paying you like $10 and you're like minted as a result of it. But like they're just like, yeah, one less thing for me to worry about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of like the jump point, right? Like where like I'm trying to think back and be like, where's it all start? Yeah, it starts from having that. And like you are just kind of like, you just kind of like take to it where all of a sudden you're like, oh, like I did this. And like, you're, you know, counting your money and wow, this is exciting, you know, like whatever, I can invest in my hobbies or interests if I can continue to spiral this up. So I'd say that's where it started. And then like, it just kind of like, I always never really stopped, right? Like where it was just kind of like, I had to rub two sticks together to figure out how to make fire. And like, then a lot of this just became like a geographical thing, right? Where I ended up going to school in America, right? In Michigan. And as a part of going to university, a lot of the universities require of international students that they're not allowed to work, right? You're not allowed to get a real job. You can work on campus, but then they pay you through some weird like scholarship loophole where they can literally pay you like $4 an hour.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And that was my world, right? So you think the kid who wakes up and shovels driveways outside of the purview of the system is going to take that? No. Not a chance. Like, how am I supposed to become the person who I need to become when I'm skint broke? Yeah. I'm not even allowed to go out and apply for a real job. I require cameras. I require computers. I require lights. And I don't have any of that. And I know where I need to be to, you know, attack this industry in the way that I think that I can. And that requires money. And if you're not going to allow me a traditional channel to acquire that money, you know, you build your walls, we're digging tunnels. That's how it works. Yeah. Like, that's just basic chase the dream 101. Yeah. Because if you're not doing that, then you're going to fail. You're going to fail. And if you're going to let that dictate your win or loss consistency or your ability to win or lose, you've already failed, you know. And in the world of business, like that's, everyone knows that. Everyone knows that like you cannot have any give. You have to stay true to your ethos, you know. So those are, you know, formulative things that make it so like, and even just my choice of quote profession of being a photographer, you're a one-man band. That's an entire business in and of itself. And that I don't even know, it just happens, you know. And that's all of a sudden, like for me, it's never been like, I'm going to become a guy who starts his own business, or I'm going to like, you know, do that. It just always was how I was wired. And like, in addition, my experience with getting employed in any standard venue is dismal. And it's not due to lack of effort for me. You know, like I remember when I was like first moved here and I lived in Gastown. Basically, one might sound like I was balling because I lived in Gastown. I convinced somebody that how I convinced them that I could afford this loft I was trying to get just because I wanted to live in a loft. Because in my mind, every photographer I idolized lived in a loft, shot images. Like, you got to put it together, brother. This is what I was thinking, right? So I basically, I'm a guy with zero work experience who just dislocated his shoulder, had surgery after backpacking around Southeast Asia for ages and working in Australia. The only meaningful work history during that point in time is I ran a film lab in Australia. Running it would be an overstatement. It was the C41 processor. I basically didn't have on paper what it would take to get this place. So we need to hack the system. How do you hack the system in this situation? All they want to know is that you have what it takes to come up with their money month after month without question, right? How could someone have the money to pay that rent on what at the time was considered, you know, like an upper market value apartment? Because I knew I was going to put 3 people inside of it immediately. You know what I mean? I was like, you know, we're just going to get all the homies in there and keep it cheap. There's one in a nice location. So simple. My parents are rich. It's that simple. And there's so many of them around Vancouver. Why can't it be me? I look like some weird ostentatious idiot. Why can't my parents be loaded and be paying all my rent? You know? So this isn't the case. But you need to be convincing enough that someone is going to take that bet on you, sight unseen, zero knowledge of what you do, zero job. I'll tell you what my first job after I locked that apartment was in. I became a balloon animal orgamist. And if you're asking yourself if that's a sophisticated way of saying clown, yes, it is. Paid more than minimum wage though. And yeah, I did lie. And I did say that I could make balloon animals without ever having made one before in my life. And I got hired to go and do a child's birthday party 3 days later. And I spent those whole 3 days on YouTube watching an account called Mr. Bubbles. And Home Dog Mr. Bubbles taught me the ones and twos of how to make balloon animals there. And you better believe by the time I hit that kid's party, I was chefing out parrots and swords for every chidler who wanted one, you know, because I had to get that money. And like, people wouldn't hire me. People were like, I'm like literally walking around trying to get a job as like a dish boy and I can't get hired. I have like holes in my shoes. It's pouring rain. I'm freezing. I'm out there every day with resumes trying to get hired. And I can't somehow. Like, I just couldn't. I remember next I became a Virgin Mobile Angel.
What is that?
You ever seen a bunch of girls walking around with wings on their back with t-shirts that say Virgin? Trying to sell you a phone plan?
Really?
Yeah, this is back when Richard Branson ran the company, and this is 2010. It's a different time. I was rolling around with them, also sometimes with wings on my back, but like I was just helping like explain the phone plans to the dudes at like Best Buy so they could help more effectively hawk Virgin Mobile phone plans and stuff. And these are just like weird like Craigslist promotional gigs that I could find, because that was another thing I used to do in America. I used to go and do like Craigslist promotional gigs all the time because paid straight cash. No one needed any like actual documentation and stuff like that. And like, I just needed to, you know, we had to cover the spread, you know? And I used to do tons of focus groups, man, all the time, just because you're paying me cash. You need to cover this spread. Like we need to inject capital into this dream, and we are living in a very bootstrap economy.
Yeah.
So that's how it started.
So of the video that you sent over, one of the things that stood out to me was talking about directing your learning into things that like excited you or were interesting to you because you'd gotten a lot of like feedback around spelling.
Oh, yeah. Well, once again, editing, right? I was like, oh, snap. Didn't realize they put that in, calling me out for being a bad speller. Right. Okay. I'm trying to remember. We're talking about the TurboTax video. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Which is also wild. That's like how I got so much information from you was the TurboTax.
Yeah, I know. This guy, Christian Tisdale, made it. He's a ledge. He's great.
It's a great video.
It's similar to this orchestration. Mostly I met him just because I tin typed him and his wife.
Right.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah, great piece. Yeah. I think at that time I was just talking, someone was asking me about like, I think they were like, you seem like you're good at everything. You seem like you're proficient. You're excellent. Like, is there anything you're not good at? And I was like, virtually to begin with, everything, you know? And then like, I went on a tangent about just how I was a shit speller, right? And I don't know. It's just one of those things where like, you know, as a kid, everyone can do it, right? It's like, oh, I can spell, right? And like, I couldn't, right? And like, you know, it gets under your skin a little bit. You start having these like mental whatever spirals where you're, oh, maybe I'm not like together like these other kids are or whatever, right? It works on your psyche. And like, I think all I was trying to get to in that little clip was I was like, look, like, you know, sometimes you're good at stuff, sometimes you're not, but like there's things you're not good at and you need to learn because that's in the way of you and where you want to be as like whatever, a business or a person, whatever. And then there's other things where it's like, yo, like, let's just not worry about that. You know what I mean? Like, when you see kids and they're like not good at math or some shit, right? And like the parents are like really hounding them to be good at math. It's like, dude, how much math do you need to do as a therapist? Probably fucking none.
0%.
Exactly, right? So there we go. There's avenues for these kids, right? Like I I still have to do a lot of emails. And like, I sometimes have like my partner proofread them and stuff. Like, you know, not being able to spell, overcomable, you know. I can talk just fine. I'll call you, you know, like we'll be all right. Anyways, so, you know, I think that was what I was trying to riff on there, where I was like, you know, there's nothing that can't be overcome, but some things we're more naturally talented at than others. And, you know, if we can focus our application and I guess our energy on things that we have, like, you know, either a slight aptitude towards, but more importantly, an intrinsic passion for to begin with. And that's more important. Like if I'm terrible at something, but I'm like stoked on it, I'm going to work on it. But you know what I don't like? Spelling. Yeah. Who gives a fuck? Yeah. Like, fuck those words. Like we're going to get them phonetically on paper, you know?
That might be
sound it out. Come on. I don't know, man.
That might be the best quote on the podcast of all time. You know, I'm driving at all this stuff, man, because you're clearly someone who likes figuring stuff out.
Right.
And, you know, everyone, there's probably not a human being who doesn't like figuring stuff out, but you like figuring out like complex things, whether it's like, how the hell do I get this apartment and like break through that system here and like kind of game it to make things happen when not having the traditional things that people might associate with getting those things. Right. Like figuring out how to get it through so you can get on with what you want to do is something that seems to be like a real fingerprint of like all the stuff that you do, and very specifically figuring out more complex things and moving from being a novice at it to having some kind of level of like understanding or even expertise on it. That sounds like something that's like a part of your life, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think I already touched on that. Gotta be an amateur at something, right? You know, like right now, my newest amateur pursuit is I've been rally crossing a Beamer of mine, which has been fun. I placed TFL so badly my first race, and now I'm like, we're mid-pack, baby. We're getting there.
Good. All right. So let's go back to Tintype. How did it go from being something that you were figuring out to starting to be like a business where you're like, I'm actually going to do this and try and like make some stuff out of it?
So that all kind of just happened in one foul swoop, right? So like essentially I initially started trying to teach myself Tintype because I was going to go to like Texas, make this film. That's what was going to happen on paper, right? I had already signed the contracts. I already knew when I was flying out. You know, pre-production was going to start rolling in like, let's say 2.5, 3 weeks, something like that. And like, I had already started like moving around in that world. And like, at this point, like I said, I'd done like 3.5 years of this mocap stuff. And like before that, I was doing a lot of editorial portraiture, a lot of like e-com work for like the Frank and Oaks and whatever of town, doing all that stuff. And, obviously, you can only do so many things, and film is all encumbering. So all that stuff, it kind of just like left behind, right? And if like you're not going to shoot the next one, somebody else will, and then a new relationship emerges within that subsect of what would be considered your income previously. So I had like left behind per se all my editorial and all my commercial work, and I very much so like guided my way into like being this, you know, more film focused guy, and we were going very hard on that. We had gotten done a big film, and I was going to be going to Texas to do the next one. And then I got a phone call where it was like, dude, you got time to talk? You might want to sit down. I'm like, all right, what is it? And they're just like, yeah, so like our A team who was going to do the Avengers or whatever, like they got replaced with another company. And so as a result, you are our B team. It's like, oh, I'm brand new. And they're like, so you don't have a job. And yeah, sorry about that. And they're just like, you know, let's get you your severance package. I was like, what? I haven't even started working, my brother. That's so cool of you, right? And like, I've worked for a lot of different like various larger companies. Yeah. And these guys are so fair in how they treat you. So shout out Weta Digital. It's Peter Jackson's company. And like those guys are great employers, and I got to give it to them. They're miles above everybody else in that industry. So I had like a severance package built into my contract ever since I penned it, and they like contracted my time for the film. I mean, I didn't really read too deeply into it because I was like, we're doing this thing. Like, you know, like I signed something, I'm ready to do it. Yeah. Anyways, so they sorted that out for me, and I was just left with no job and time and just kind of like this vast expanse where like, like it's like the train had hit the station and it's like, now what? Right? Like you didn't realize the train was even stopping. You thought you're, many stops ahead in terms of your final destination. And you just got let out in a town abruptly and you're looking around being like, well, like what now? Right? And that's cool. And so it's not like I hadn't been there before, right? Like that's kind of the nature of like, striking out on your own and doing something that's challenging and difficult. And I just was like, well, life as of now has always been about one thing and one thing alone. And it's like just living behind cameras and like constantly doubling down on that bet that like, that this is, what you're doing. This is how you make a living. And I'd already like started leaning into the Tintype thing. I was planning on trying to teach myself well in Texas. But then I was like, well, now you got this like time and you might as well teach yourself Tintype. And so I began teaching myself Tintype, just reading old books. There was no YouTube videos or anything at that time. And just like pure trial and error. I knew a lot about darkroom work, so that helped. And I kind of got to a point of like semi-competency. Not great by any standards looking backwards, but like good enough that like all of a sudden the girls who ran the East Side Flea hit me up and they're like, oh, we heard you do Tintype. We'd like you to do Tintype at the East Side Flea. Initially I was trepid because I was like, I don't know if I'm like at the point where I want to like hang my shingle and sling these things out. I also like custom built this crazy darkroom that's on the back of a tricycle. My friend Jonathan Harris used to have a DJ Tryke that was so sick. I thought it was like mind bending. And then like, I was like, I'm going to figure out a tricycle business one day. So when this all happened, I was like, we're building a tricycle with the darkroom on the back of it. Custom built it myself and all that stuff. And then, I got asked to go to the East Side Flea to make some Tintypes on location for people who came to the Flea. And initially I was a little trepid about it. And then I don't even know if this is true or not. But they said that somebody else in town would do it if I didn't. And I was like, no chance. Like, forget about it. There's no way that like I'm letting someone be like quote unquote first to market. That's just like my kind of competitive side coming out. You know what I mean? And I'm like, there's no way I'm letting this person go first to market and like them like hang their shingle first within like, the Vancouver area code. Like, if I'm going to be that dude, I'm going to be the dude. And so I was like, all right, whatever, then I'll see you this weekend. Like, let's go. Like, that was it. It was over. It was done. I showed up and the response was tremendous. Basically, people were just like amped, right? And like, obviously, within that subsect, the East Side Flea, people go there, people like you, people like vinyl, people like tangibles, people like, maybe a bit of nostalgia in their life. And I was really busy. I sold and made a bunch of Tintypes and people were incredibly stoked. And I love a business like that where people are so amped on like the outcome and product of what you're providing where you're just like, yeah, like thumbs up, dude. Like we're both stoked, commerce has occurred. Yeah. It maintained, like I was describing before, in terms of the early days of photography, the romanticism of true specialty, where like, it wasn't like everyone's crowded around the monitor. And I swear to God, I've literally been there where you're the shooter. You have a person hired as your digital tech who's literally just like playing Mastro on the computer. And then we have like the client and the art director and the stylist and the hair and makeup. And everyone is just like spread around the monitor and they're just like watching the images pop up. Right. And like, depending on what kind of people those people are, a lot of them in their mind are kind of constantly, it's just human nature. They're like, maybe pump the shadows a bit or like maybe descend. Everyone in their mind is like being like, oh, I might do it this way because these tools are so universally accessible that everyone is like, well, I have Lightroom or, like I have like Capture One. Like I've, done this before. Like, and everyone's kind of going through it. And there's no longer that like, Richard Avedon, Helmut Newton, Henry Cartier-Bresson, jus de vie, where all of a sudden it's like, look, relax. This is me. I got this. And it wasn't like you're like, oh, I know what preset he used. It was like, no, you don't have any idea how this guy gets his look. You don't know what, like you can see the film stock, but you don't know if he's running it in Rodinal or D76. Is he pushing it 2 stops? Is he pulling it a stop? What kind of filters is he using in the darkroom? How does he make his tones so juicy? Like no one knows how that works. And you had to hire the guy who was the specialist at that to get it done. And no one's going to question them. No one's going to be like, are you sure you want to be using a Tri-X 400? No, you hired that guy to show up because you liked his portfolio. You liked his look and you wanted it and you couldn't get it because only he has that unique skill set to achieve that. And that's what attracted me to photography is it brought about that classic romanticism where like, this is not a cookie cutter pursuit. You know, if you want to create Tintype images, you have to be an absolute finesse specialist. And you can make it Tintype, but it's going to look flat. It's going to wash out. It's going to be overexposed. But if you want to make perfect Tintype, the only way to do it is pure skill and finesse.
So you start this thing, you start going to Eastside Flea, and then what happens?
I'm just starting to do Eastside Flea and like essentially, at that point in time, like people are stoked about it. And the people who are actually most stoked about it are people who organize markets because I am a performance craft, right? Like I'm not selling you a bar of soap. I can't make you a Tintype of yourself beforehand. I do it on the spot. I do it live. And if you've ever seen it done in person, it's mind blowing. Just watching it take shape to this day, it's just fascinating to me. Like I'm going to create a negative image on top of a sheet of glass or metal. I'm going to be able to wash it off, show you the negative image. And I drop this image into a vat and the entire thing magically disappears and goes and reappears as a unbelievably graded positive. If you do a Tintype right, you're replicatable. Just because they only read one spectrum of light, unlike every other form of photography that reads all spectrums, it only reads the UV spectrum of light. And so in and of that, in and of itself, it just creates much more luscious tonal grade in black and white than almost anything can achieve.
Yeah. So where does it go from there though?
Oh, so we're at the Eastside Flea. We're shooting these things. It's incredibly popular. And then all of a sudden it's like, cool. And like at the time too, I'm still shooting like commercially per se. I'm doing like a lot of work for like Mark's Work Warehouse at that point. I'm just like flying out to Calgary like once, twice a month to like shoot a bunch of like in-store ad campaign work and stuff like that. And I'm bagging it up, like I'm a lens man. You got the cash, I got the vision. Boom, team, let's go, And those are kind of happening both side by each, right? The thing that I didn't like about regular photography is it's the working for work. Right? Where you're constantly qualifying yourself constantly to achieve the job. And only then does the real work begin. And so like you're working so much just to like, begin working? Like what are we even talking about here? Right? And like, meanwhile with Tintype, it just like started like streamlining a lot of that out, right? Where it's like, look, like I don't have to like talk with a million art directors or send out ad portfolios and mailers and, create like a marketing list and like literally wear like every hat under the sun. I just need to shoot excellent Tintypes.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I will make excellent Tintypes for anybody who wants to contract me to make these Tintypes. And a twist started to happen where all of a sudden I wasn't interested in actively pursuing new traditional photography shooting jobs. And all this happened, frankly, at like inadvertently the perfect time, just because the photography industry is a dark place these days. I just was like, you know what? Like, this is hella specialized. You're not just going to show up and be like, yeah, I went to London Drugs and got this camera and this Lightroom program, and we're there, brother. Like, watch some YouTube tutorials. No, it's like hella specialized. And so I just like leaned into that, and I just became more like, I was like the Tintype guy, and like, I was still doing the, photography work for like Mark's Work Warehouse or whatever. And, I'd still get like, just not every movie needs like massive Hollywood mocap production, right? But like when they do, there's not a lot of guys who can do that either. But I'm not working nonstop in film either at this point. It's like all of a sudden I'll go and I'll do like a 2-month job or like a 3-week job or whatever. So I'm doing all this and that's all going great. It comes to a point where like I become so busy with Tintypes. And it's so exhausting to go from market to market to market to market to market, much like we were talking about DJing. You're carrying on everything, setting up, breaking down everywhere. So after like my first Christmas season where I'm literally like, I'm talking like lineups of people where I'm sweating, doing these back to 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 back as fast as I can because I paid to be at the market. I get a fixed amount of time. I'm not selling bars of soap that I made beforehand, so I can't just off my SKUs. I literally have to make that money back like a race.
Yeah.
Like literal racehorse. You're just, and, obviously working under those pressurized conditions, just, no, can't get past the films. I understand it. Like I know how to like execute under pressure. That's always my strong point. And this becomes somewhat exhausting, where not only do I find it exhausting, but I'd love to be able to provide a more in-depth experience to every single person who I photograph. And come my second Christmas season, because my first one was insane, I ended up just being like, you know what? We're going to like literally hang the shingle and set up a studio, right? And that was my transition point to where I like brick and mortared. Up to that point, I was still just like bootstrapping, and I was storing my like tricycle and like the box that bounced the back of it to do dark. I was just storing it all in like a very small storage space I had beneath my apartment. And I was just staying like super, super tight and compacted. And I do all the work where it's like load everything, move everything. It was so intensive. And then like once you get there, it's not like great. Now like the work does itself. So then you were chefing, you were cooking them up. So
you start your brick and mortar. Tell us about that, but also let's talk about the other side of your other business. What else you do?
So I started my brick and mortar kind of out of a response of having just a massive demand at every single market that I'd set up at. And I wanted to be able to provide people who came to see me sort of the most in-depth and immersive experience they could have, where I take the time to explain the process to them, answer any questions they had, just be incredibly gracious with my time, where I'd have to do it once, twice, 3 times. Whatever resulted in my sitter's end result being stoked was what I became most concerned about. In my opinion, every great business sells stoke, and they sell stoke through the medium of that product, regardless of what that product is. So if you are not stoked, I have not provided the product that we sent out to offer. So that is my stance at when it comes to tin types. And that's what led me to set up a brick and mortar tin type situation. And so I did that for a while, and that, between my other kind of commercial photography world and stuff, was, I guess, paying the bills, as it were. And I was still doing some visual effects, motion capture. And what happened is I got a phone call. I was going to be going to the Yukon on behalf of Disney. And I kid you not, my whole job was to make reference images of the Northern Lights, which means that I would just be like getting taken out into the middle of lake beds and spending the night in an igloo, time-lapsing the Northern Lights so that they could be replicated digitally for a film called Call of the Wild with Harrison Ford. I'd already done the summer component of this job, which was 3D mapping some mountain ranges. And I was supposed to be going back for the winter. I was going in 3 days. And I decided to go snowboarding with my friends. And one of my friends ran into me while snowboarding, sent me head over heels, and I shattered my collarbone many places. And I was like, oh God, like this isn't great. Cause I immediately knew like, all right, this job's done. Like you're cooked. Like you this one's not happening. Right. So it was a real bummer. And I don't know. I believe in like examining situations, studying them, learning from what's happening, and finding that silver lining. So what was happening was very clear. We had an injury, like I mentioned sort of when we were chatting. I've had a lot of injuries, ACL tears, shoulder dislocations, etc. This is a common recurring factor in my life. And in no way am I willing to quit sending it. I would love to dirt bike more. I would love to mountain bike more. I love, being on that edge, right? And so how do I solve this problem forever? How do I make it so I can be just written off due to my decisions, but still maintain income beyond that? Stick to what, some people would describe as their circle of competence. Are you familiar with that term? The Warren Buffett number, right? So I want to stick to my circle of competence. And, obviously through our discussions, it's very clear what that is. It's highly specialized dyeing analog processes, right? And one of the things that I absolutely loved, which at that time had disappeared from Vancouver within the past 8 months, was analog photo booths. The result that they create is much like we've been discussing with records and tin types, irreplicatable. Its depth of texture and its quality is insane. And so I decided then, when I was down and out and I had lost a ton of money, we were going to do what every creative and every business person does. You have to double down. You have to double down. where you're like, well, let's go. This thing is not winning. I am winning, right? And this is like right now, analog photo booths are on the rage. Like kids love them now, but no one gave a shit, right? And I went about trying to find one and buy one, and I'm unwilling to discuss any of how that works. I get so many emails per week. And the thing is that no one in our community wants to sell anybody an analog photo booth, because the essence of a sale is you are selling an asset.
Uh-huh.
When you sell someone an analog photo booth, you are actually just buying a headache, because everyone's going to be like, it's not working. Something's broken. It's not doing the thing. And unless you're like a very in-depth process-based person who's like got what it takes to deal with that on their own and realize it's not the person. It's like buying an old VW Bug. Just because the guy sold it to you, it was running. You drove it home. Just because you don't know how to tune Weber carburetors does not necessarily make it the previous owner's problem. You know what I mean? And so there's that kind of issues. But I managed to, I became part of the analog photo booth family much earlier than this rage that we're currently experiencing today, right? And I ended up purchasing an analog photo booth because I loved them, and they were leaving the town, and it almost felt as though, well, this is perfect. I am 100% the guy who could do this, And I ended up talking to my friend Simon, who he owns and operates The American. It's a bar here in town on Main Street. And I chatted with him. I saw him a couple days after I chatted, my collarbone all gimped up, headed to the party, glass of wine in one hand, chilling. And I was like, hey, Simon, I got something I want to ask you. And he's just like, he got it. He was like a record lover where he got it right away. He's like, you mean the black and white ones, like the this. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And he already knows that I'm doing the Tin Type game. We've known each other for a while. So he knows I'm no joke. I ain't no slouch, right? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. Because I was like, I need some place to put it. Like, it's got to like do business for this to be, a part of this path that I coursed to circumnavigate when I'm broken, roboticize, I guess. And he was into it, and he was like, great, this is phenomenal. I love it. And so that was kind of the journey that led me to purchasing my first analog photo booth.
So when we were taking a quick break there, you went and you got a real energy about it when you were talking about it has to be right.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking about like fabricating these things and making sure that every element is like true to form. So tell me about that.
That comes a bit later on, where in essence, like these analog photo booths are incredibly hard to come by. There's like 500 of them worldwide. There's 50 of us to 60 of us who know how to operate them worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so everyone who knows how to operate them loves them very deeply. We've got, everyone coming out of the woodwork these days due to TikTok trying to join in, but like those guys are, we can't ensure that they're there for the love. Let's put it that way. So they're very hard to find. And what ended up happening was, a location that I was trying to partner with, for some reason at the time, I couldn't understand why they were refusing an analog booth. They didn't want it. They're like, no. And I kept on trying to be like, are you sure we're talking about the same thing? These things are like a part of like photo history. And like, I think it would be really important to like have one, it was a gallery. And I was like, focused on photography as well. And I was like, I think it'd be really important to have one here. And they refused. And they were like, we'll only accept a digital one. And I was like, and this is where like all of a sudden I'm like, all right, bet. Like, I'll show you what we're really made of around here. So like, I was like, cool. Like, and then in my mind, like there's only one solution, because like I had to meet this engagement where it stood. Mm. And so in my mind was like, great. Like if that's the path through and this is like what we need, like I'm always going to rise. And, I obviously was like very involved in the photo booth industry at this time. And like, I just like so many things about the way that most digital photo booths and how they were constructed, how I'd see that, it bothered me. I was like, this isn't spec. This isn't correct. This isn't the proper experience. Mm. And it can be done better. And it irked me that no one was doing it better. And so you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? Like if that's how you feel, like, let's see it. You know what I mean? Like, judgment can only belong to the gladiator within the arena. Mm-hmm. That's Teddy Roosevelt, I believe, that's his quote. And so, anybody who's a spectator will cheer and jeer and judge, but no one except for the gladiator within the arena truly has the grounds to make judgment. And I feel that very much so. And so within that, I was like, well, let's enter this arena. So I noticed all these idiosyncrasies that I knew could be corrected if someone had just taken the time to build it correctly. And I started going down the path of doing that, where I began fabricating my own digital cabinets that, as I interpret them, are replica homage builds of exactly the experience that the analog would provide for you, short a chemicalized dip and dunk output.
Mm-hmm. So you did it for the gallery and the gallery was happy?
100%.
But that's not what you do with your business though, is it?
I mean, analog is where my true passion lies. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, if I could continue to acquire these analogs like no tomorrow, in fact, like the degree in which I'm interested in continuing to proliferate analogs within the market is like, there's a guy in France who actually figured out how he can 3D print and code with Arduinos, his own dip and dunk photo booth. Mm-hmm. The only stand back right now from making it something that you could really like get working in a public space is that it only has the ability to articulate one arm per exposure. So every exposure has a 3.5 minute wait time between it. Right. So there's overcomable things. And like, yes, the analog is the true passion, but they're not cheap by any standards. Mm-hmm. They will leave you flabbergasted as to how much money an analog photo booth would cost you. Like, I can tell you how much you would have to pay if you wanted to buy one.
How much?
I'm going to give you 2 guesses. We're going to do under, over.
20,000.
Over.
60,000.
Under. Probably about 40,000 USD. That's how much it would cost you to buy one.
Wow. And that's just entry point, not all the other stuff involved with it.
You just get a booth that may or may not run.
Yeah.
And then you don't even know how to modify it to use the new paper that we have to use worldwide because it used to only be made in Russia. And that ended 2.5 years ago. We had to work with Czechoslovakia to custom engineer a solution. Like, you better know somebody who knows how to use a 3D printer. You better know somebody who knows how to use like, a 3D modeling program, LiDAR scanners. You're going to want to know some people who know how to solve some problems if this is something that like intrigues you. You know what I mean?
So how many analog booths do you have now?
4. And then I've got the parts to build a 5th one. Recovered some parts from some old Ace Hotel booths that were being disassembled and turned into digitals. And plan to begin the process of trying to build analogs from the ground up using old stock parts pretty soon, as well as exploring different methodologies and where we can take this one guy's technology that is 3D printable. And, my specialty is building really classy cabinets. That's where I stride, and kind of blending those two together. So there is pathways very much so in the future where we can build brand new analog photo booths using 3D printing technology and Arduino coding.
That's so crazy.
So, and what's even crazier about those for like serious photography nerds is to describe how an analog photo booth currently works, it's like anybody mechanical will understand it's belt timed and cam actuated. So there's no way that any step in the 13-step chemical process can last longer than the next step. Everything needs to be cam actuated. And if you need a chemical step to last longer, you simply just need to put another bath after it that contains the same chemical. But you only have 13 steps to remix to make your images work, right? What's interesting with the ones that are like Arduino and like 3D printed and stuff like that is some guys over in London are doing some fascinating projects where you can recode how long it spends in each bath. And so they've been able to re-engineer how to shoot color photos in photo booths through this new process. So that's been kind of fascinating.
Heck yeah, man. So Mike, Mike, our engineer, for anyone who doesn't know, big photo guy.
Right on.
What are some questions you have?
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on gatekeeping in photography and maybe AI in photography as well.
Well, gatekeeping, gatekeeping, gatekeeping in both my industries exists in a major way. And like, I think that like gatekeeping with Tintype is falling down. Gatekeeping within the analog photo booth community is not a matter of ego. It's a matter of self-preservation, because we're all struggling to keep all of our photo booths around the world alive. We're all a family who is assuredly in this for the pure love of our pursuit. A lot of us got into it when, no one cared and we cared and we held that torch. And now that it's getting all this shine and there's like a lot of like, I guess just newcomers to our field whose interest has been piqued by what they consider popularity, not true intrinsic love. I think that people are a lot more hesitant to welcome them into our fold because there's going to come a point where, you need to hold all of your cards in order to keep your robots working. So it's kind of a tricky one.
Listen, man, we talk about gatekeeping on here a lot because anyone who really cares about something is protective of it.
Right.
And there can be a version of like, I'm protective of it because I want it to survive and be great. And you can be protective of it because you're being a jerk and you're trying to keep people out. And there's like a gray area in between those things where great people can act like assholes or assholes can act like great people. It's not an easy conversation, but I think like anything that's worth being passionate about and being like really into is going to engender some of that in people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but yeah, within our community, we are very much so family, like everyone's helping everybody. I think like it's more of just like, I wouldn't say a distrust of newcomers, but like, I think everyone's always trepid to figure out like where these people are coming from and what leads them to this road. And like, anything that gains mass popularity tends to convolute the motivations that lead people to those destinations.
Yeah. I never think to add this into a conversation, but Mike's question about what do you think of AI?
Me?
Like, and you mean adjacent to this, right?
Like creating photos with AI. I didn't know it was a thing until recently, and I'm a bit of a hater. But my buddy Carl mentioned that when photography was invented, painters probably felt the same way about photographers as I do about AI photographers. So thoughts about that?
I mean, what I think of it, personally, don't really use it myself. Not in a very frequent manner. I know people who love it. What I think of it is that like, I think it's a cool tool and I think that there's no point in hating it or trying to run against the grain of it. In fact, like we used AI as it were ages ago with these Hollywood films to replicate these actors, and people have like no idea the power that this technology has because everyone's like, wow, it's doing this these days. I was like, dude, we were doing that in 2013, but it was just at $1 billion company, bro. Like you just have the tools in your hands now. So, the one thing I don't have anything against it. And in my world, personally, I'm entirely insulated from it because what I do and what our companies do is, as we've discussed, irreplicatable. You cannot end up with the results that we provide through any other way than the original methodology of creation, which cannot be done through a computer. It has to be done in a tangible sense. So I'm insulated from it. What concerns me is more from like a sidebar in economics prospectus, where we already have a massive, overpopulation problem that's creating a giant housing problem, right? And like, housing gets more expensive. And the only thing you have to do to continue to run on the hamster wheel to stay buoyant is you need to make more money, right? Money is a result of supply and demand. So my problem with AI is that it already has, it speeds up the wealth conglomeration to the top. Mm-hmm. That's my big problem with it, where, the amount of jobs that are going to be demolished by AI, and whether that's, your coding department or AI, takes its form in the robotics department for retrieving and warehouse delivery situations, whatever. It's happening so unbelievably fast that there's no like, not like you give a shit about government oversight, but like there's no government policy that's like limiting like what's going on here.
Totally.
And that's maybe like my concern is that from an economics perspective, it's like people sadly enough need a hamster wheel to run on to power the larger machine at hand. You know, everyone's a quote cog in the machine. And when we start removing these cogs and replacing with, let's call it a digital component in terms of like AI's application, you know, we end up with a pile of cogs on the side that are no longer needed because we've streamlined it. We've seen it happen so many times in different technologies. But like the big problem is that these are people. These are people who have lives, who have jobs, who have homes, who have dreams, who have aspirations. And that's my thing. Is I'm like, dude, like, must really be rough to like all of a sudden just like have, you know, everything that you've worked for be sidelined by a computer. And now what? Like, now what job do you go and where do you go that's safe? Where do you go that's you're confident that a robot won't be able to come and take that over? And, you know, and it's like, that's one thing. And that's worrying about actual humans, you know, but then the other thing on top of that is kind of like the mass wealth conglomeration to the top. And like, look, I'm not an economics student, not qualified for any of this. I'm just a guy who's very observative and I understand patterns, right? And, you know, rich people don't really love money. You know what I mean? What do rich people love?
Comfort?
Assets.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
Rich people love assets. And why do they love assets?
You tell me.
They outperform cash. Mm-hmm. Cash actually loses value every year. Mm-hmm. Assets tend to gain value. Mm-hmm. Now, what's the best performing asset class?
I think it's real estate.
It's technically art, but real estate is actually close second. So, you know, if we shove a ton of money up into the very, very, very top tier and they don't like money and they like assets, right? And these people who just got their cog pulled out of the machine and sat down over here, they continue to need to have a place to live, right? Guess who just bought all the places to live? The dudes who just have robots running these positions, right? And it just creates like a really rough, like sort of like downward spiral of absolute, like, you know, late stage capitalist dystopianism. That's my qualm with it, right? Other than that, fuck, you know, like.
Other than that.
Other than that, but like, you know, these are, I'm like, this has been going on for a long time though, you know, like Henry Ford invented the production line and we've been speeding shit up ever since. But we've always been speeding shit up with the asterisks of human oversight involved, right? And now we've eliminated that. And for like a corporate dreamscape, this is the best thing to ever happen. Like, you know, shareholder value. It's like people care about that, you know? And so that's the problem. That's the problem I see, you know? And I'm always like a people's champ in that perspective because like, you know, like I've been there, dude. Like I've been on that hamster wheel. I know what being employed unfairly is like. And I know what all this feels like. And that's my concern. But other than that, like, hey, you know, what are we going to do? Hate the future? It's not happening.
Yeah, man. And we kind of came a good full circle there, talking about like assembly line and oversight, but also like movement of technology away from like really quality things to things that are just like build it cheap and, you know, you can have a less quality experience. I have one more question for you, but before we get to it, in the episode notes, we'll put like where people can look you up and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to put a backdrop to this question that I ask. The way that I started my business and the way that I build things is I'm a specialist in something, and I didn't set out to be. It's totally accidental, but I found myself in a position where I was like, I think very few people on the planet could do what I do, how I do it. And it's been awesome. And when someone asked me recently, do you want to have a business that is that anyone can just like contact and get services, or do you want to be someone has to know who you are and have your phone number to get a hold of you? And when they said it, it really made me think, because it's like on one side, the first one's compelling. It's like, oh, I could have a business and, you know, all this, you know, grow the company, But the other was like, listen, I don't want to be having people ask me to do a bunch of stuff that I'm not interested in doing, or that like another person could do. It just seems like a huge headache. And I'm unconvinced in one way or another. But going to you, if you're thinking about like young creatives coming up, like let's say people who are passionate about photography or writing or film or whatever, anything, the landscape's changed a lot. AI is like a good example of that. Are people better off becoming really strong generalists, or are they better off becoming really deep specialists in something?
That is a question that can only be answered by the person who is on that path. Because some people, they enjoy being a generalist because they love variety. They're like, oh, I love it. I'm doing something different all the time, right? Like, other people, they love absolutely mastering something super niche, and they love, doing 100 versions of the same thing till they find perfection. So, I'd say that's something that's more guided just by individuals, and it's like, and the Buddhist belief is that everyone around the world is trying to achieve happiness. They're just misconstrued in what avenue will get them there.
Oh yeah. Awesome, man. I think it's a great place to end it. Dude, thank you so much for coming by. This was a super awesome conversation. Everyone, for those listening, check out all the links below to see where you can look up Ian's work. And also, I just want to say, there's a lot of talk on the podcast about like betting yourself, taking a leap and all that. And it's also okay not to do that. It's fine to take like more of a kind of the beaten path. But I will say, when you do take a leap and you bet on yourself and you do some really wild stuff, it's not just easy, it's hard. But the hard stuff is also super rewarding, and everything you learn from it, all the crazy experiences you have, I think that's part of the pay in a lot of ways. And I think today's guest tells you that. So thanks so much. We'll see you next time. One step beyond. One step